Today, we are diving straight into an explainer about a ruler who completely flipped the script on what it meant to be a great emperor in ancient India. We're stepping into the classroom of history to look at the Rashtrakuta Dynasty, and specifically a monarch who built a golden age not with a sword, but with a pen.
To keep things organized, we're going to follow a clear timeline of his life, breaking his massive 64-year reign into 5 distinct chapters: the boy emperor's ascent, diplomacy over bloodshed, building the capital Manyakheta, a golden age of literature, and lastly, the legacy of the scholar.
But before we get into the exact dates, I want you to think about this question. Who is the Indian monarch that ruled longer than almost anyone else in history, yet is remembered primarily for literature and peace? I mean, in an era where greatness was almost exclusively measured by the size of your army, who actively chooses the path of poetry?
Well, the answer is Amoghavarsha I. He held the throne of the mighty Rashtrakuta Empire for an absolute staggering 64 years. Seriously, let that number sink in. 64 years. That makes his reign one of the longest in all of recorded history, stretching from 814 to 878 CE. And we're not talking about a small provincial state here. This empire spanned all the way from central and northern India deep into the south.
Let's kick things off with our first chapter, the boy emperor's ascent. And yeah, it was a wildly tumultuous start. So the timeline begins in 814 CE. Amoghavarsha takes the throne, but he's only 14 years old. Naturally, rivals see a teenager and, they smell blood. By 816 CE, major rebellions led by groups like the Western Gangas actually force him out. He's completely deposed. But he doesn't just fade into history. With the help of his incredibly loyal cousin Karka, he fights his way back, and by 821 CE, he completely regains power. Now, experiencing that kind of early trauma, losing your kingdom as a kid, that almost certainly shaped his entire worldview on war and stability. And you can really see the massive paradigm shift when you compare him to his father. His dad, Govinda III, was the ultimate warrior. The guy expanded the empire's borders through just relentless, aggressive military campaigns. But Amoghavarsha, having lived through the chaos of rebellion firsthand, he consciously chose the path of the peacemaker. He figured out pretty quickly that constantly expanding your borders just meant constant bloodshed. So he focused inward to stabilize what he already had.
Which brings us right into Section 2, diplomacy over bloodshed.
So, how exactly do you survive in medieval India if you aren't constantly conquering? You marry into the enemy's family. Instead of battlefield slaughter, he wove this incredibly complex web of peace using strategic marriages. He married his daughter Chandrabalabai to the Ganga king Buddhaga I. Another daughter, Rivakanamiti, married the Ganga prince Aranya. He even arranged for a Rata princess to marry Pallava king Nandivarman II. By tying his own blood to his greatest political rivals, he basically made it impossible for them to attack him. It's an absolute masterclass in ancient statecraft.
But hey, do not mistake his preference for peace as weakness. No way. When the Eastern Chalukyas of Vengi tried to push their luck and take advantage of him, Amoghavarsha didn't hesitate. He met them at the Battle of Vingavali, completely crushed them, and actually earned the title Veera Narayana, which translates to the heroic Narayana. So he proved to the world that while he preferred peace, he was absolutely capable of winning a war.
With the borders finally secure, we step into Chapter 3, building the capital, Manyakheta.
This is where his grand vision really takes physical form. He deliberately shifted the imperial base from the old city of Mayurakandi and built a brand new capital from scratch, Manyakheta, which is modern-day Malkhed in Karnataka. And he didn't just build a military stronghold. He intentionally designed it to be a magnet for the greatest scholars and philosophers from across India. He literally transformed it into a global cultural hub that could rival any major city in the world at that time.
And to understand just how devoted he was to the citizens living in this empire, you have to hear this story from the Sanjan inscription. Apparently, when a terrible public calamity threatened his people, Amoghavarsha literally amputated his own left finger and sacrificed it to the goddess Mahalakshmi of Kolhapur to appease the heavens. Actually, think about that for a second. Historians often compare this level of extreme personal sacrifice for the public good to legendary mythological kings like Shibi and Bali. It's a striking reminder that he saw himself as a protector of his people, not their tyrant. That deep empathy for his citizens extended directly to their language and culture, which leads us to Chapter 4, a golden age of literature.
Think of his royal court like an Ivy League faculty of the 9th century. He sponsored an absolute all-star roster of intellectuals. You've got the revered Jain monk Jinasena writing the spiritual epic, the Adi Purana.
You have Mahaviracharya, this brilliant mathematician mapping out the Ganita Sara Sangraha. And perhaps most significantly, you have the poet Srivijaya, who worked closely with Amoghavarsha to produce the Kavirajamarga.
Now, that last text, the Kavirajamarga, is a total game changer. It translates to the royal path for poets, and it's the earliest known literary work in the Kannada language. Before this, Kannada was heavily just a spoken language of the common people, while the elites all used Sanskrit. But this book laid down the foundational rules of poetry and grammar. It lavishly praised the cultural richness of the Kannada people, and it essentially elevated Kannada right up to a celebrated, high-class literary medium. It gave an entire culture its soul.
But what's really cool is that Amoghavarsha wasn't just cutting checks to fund other writers. He was right there in the trenches with them. He personally authored the Prashnottara Ratnamalika, which is a highly regarded Sanskrit religious text, and he wrote this profound philosophical work in his twilight years, right as he started stepping back from the exhausting daily grind of royal administration.
As we enter our final section, Chapter 5, we look at the legacy of the scholar. To really put his success into perspective, just listen to this quote from the 9th century Arab traveler and merchant Suleiman. He visited India during this reign and wrote that the Rashtrakuta Empire was one of the 4 principal empires of the entire world. He ranked it right up there with the Roman, Chinese, and Arab empires. It just goes to show that Amoghavarsha's peaceful approach didn't make him look weak on the global stage. It actually earned him immense international validation. Modern historians often revere him as the Ashoka of the South. And when you look at the facts, it's easy to see why. He maintained perfect religious harmony. Even though he was a devoted disciple of Jinasena and leaned toward Digambara Jainism himself, he still heavily patronized Hindu temples and Buddhist monasteries. He poured money into agriculture instead of endless wars. And, in an exceptionally rare move for a medieval king, he voluntarily abdicated the throne in his old age, handing over power so he could dedicate his final days entirely to spirituality. So as we wrap up this classroom explainer, I'll leave you with a thought that challenges everything we usually celebrate in history. If a civilization's true greatness is measured not by how much land it forcibly conquers, but by the literature, the cultural identity, and the lasting peace it leaves behind, is Amoghavarsha the first actually India's most successful monarch? It's definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep questioning what truly makes a leader great.